Hello, good evening, and welcome to Book Passage. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. I develop programming for diversity and social justice. Remember to put your comments and questions in the chat. I promise for tonight's special event, we will eventually get to those. And in fact, tonight's event is special for several reasons, not least of which it's part of our events commemorating Black History Month, and it's part of Book Passage's annual Race in America series, where we feature authors and activists discussing topical issues around race and politics and other social issues. The difference with it this year, in the past, those of you who have joined us for Race in America, it's always been a panel event. Just a one-night panel event. This year, we're doing it a little differently, and we have a 3-night series of individual events and different topics and different authors. So I'm really excited about this. And we have 2 wonderfully talented authors kicking off this year's event. They're outstanding writers, thinkers, and they're going to be talking about our featured book, Moon and the Mars, as well as the importance of Black literature, Black voices. Moon and the Mars by Corthron is an exploration of New York City and America leading up to the Civil War. And this is all through the eyes of a young biracial girl whose time and life straddles between her Black family and her Irish family. Kia's first book won the Center for Fiction's first novel prize, winner of Center for Fiction's first novel prize. And this book, now a few years later, is set in that civil rights, leading up to the civil rights time period. And it takes place in an impoverished 5 Points district of New York, where we experience neighborhood life through the eyes of Theo, an orphan living between those 2 families. In addition to being an award-winning fiction writer, Kia is a nationally and internationally produced playwright. For her body of work for the stage, she has garnered many awards, such as the Flora Roberts Award and the Wyndham Campbell Prize for Drama. She joins us from Harlem. Joining Kia, and equally impressive, is Jennifer Baker, who was named the 2019 Publishers Weekly Star Watch Superstar because her varied work championing diversity in publishing has made her indispensable in the book industry. Jen has been a publishing professional for many years in a range of roles, including instructor for Bay Path University's Creative Nonfiction MFA program. With that, I leave you in very capable hands of Jen Baker.
Thanks so much, Paula, and for Book Passages for hosting this wonderful conversation with Kia Corthron, someone I admire greatly, and who is, just has the best personality. You're always so effervescent, Kia. I don't know how you do it. I really don't. And so I am very honored to be in combo. And so Kia's going to start us off with a reading, and I don't know if you want to lead into the reading or let people know what to expect.
Yeah, I can. And it's Total Mutual Admiration Society there with Jen. Paula, thank you so much for that introduction. There was one word that you got wrong that threw us off 100 years. It's not leading into the civil rights era. It's leading into the Civil War. So just so people don't think this is, 1960s, it's actually 1860s. The book
I
actually.
promised I was thinking Civil War and said civil rights.
It was actually kind of funny. I thought so people were in the right headspace. I figured I have to correct that. So it actually takes place between 1857 and 1863. This is the book. I saw it. Paula had some behind her, and it takes place in 5 points, which is it was in downtown Manhattan, the most impoverished area of New York City at that time. For people who live in New York, it's where the court buildings are now. It was in that area where there was a lot of interaction between the Irish and the Black communities. And the main character of Moon and the Mars is Theo, which is short for Theodora. She's a girl of 7 at the beginning and 13 towards the end, and then there's an epilogue. She had an Irish mother and a Black father, and she's an orphan, but she lives between the tenement apartments of her Black and Irish grandmother. So she also has an Irish aunt, a Black aunt. So she has lots of family, even though she does not have parents. So I'm going to actually, over this evening, I'm going to read a short piece from each side of her family. So I'm going to start with the Irish side. And this is the summer of 1859. So Theo is 9.5 years old. You should know that Kieran is an 11-year-old boy, and he's a family friend from Ireland who lives with her Irish grandmother. There's a little cameo from her Irish aunt, who's Auntie Siobhan. And then in the second part of the piece, we'll see Grammy Cahill, who is her Irish aunt, who has a table on the street where she sells all sorts of used junk. So that's how she makes a living. Most important thing, please forgive my Irish accent. So again, Theo is 9.5. We hear the music a block away before me and Kieran step inside the dance emporium. Packed, hot. The colored man at the piano, Irish fiddler, colored with the banjo. Everybody dancing, everybody jaunty. Only once did I ever attend a ceilidh back home, say Kieran, smiling. What's a ceilidh? Hold down, Americans say. Partner dancing. Then the music stopped and the piano players say, here we go. The dance floor clearing, everyone backing away from the center, Kieran and me craning our necks to see. An Irish man and a colored man come out, shuffling and stomping, fingers snapping, heels spinning, clickety, clickety, tap, 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 the fancy footwork. Everyone whooping and cheering, more, more, more. And they give us more. Then Kieran touched my arm, point, as if I couldn't see myself who took the floor replacing the men. Auntie Siobhan lift her dress so we spy her ankles, stomping and clomping, slip slide, her feet so fast I hardly see 'em, rat-a-tat-tatting like rain on the roof. Then a colored man danced right up to Auntie Siobhan, click stomping faster. Then she go faster, then he go faster. They partnering, they competing. Everybody clapping, tap it, tap it, tap it. Auntie Siobhan win. Them both laughing. Then Auntie Siobhan go to the bar, leaning on it, the sweat pouring. Me happy the room's so crowded, she can't see me and Kieran here, seeing her. Other people's dance competing now, but hard for me take my eyes off my auntie. She swig her drink down, then turned to look right at Kieran and me. Give us a wink. Next morning, Auntie Siobhan won the dancing last night. Grammy Cahol's eyes narrow at me over the table. On the how would you know that? Oh, say nearby Maeve, Grammy's dearest friend and fiercest competitor. Your Isle Grammy's the real stepper in the family. Belle of Carrie, she was. Grammy, who'd been getting ready to snap at me for being where I shouldn't have been, now go a little pink, then smile. Oh, granddaughter, close your mouth before it feeds of flies. What you saw last night when you were where you shouldn't have, they're the steps we brought over from the Isle. Yes, I had quite the click in my heels, stomping all over the county. Siobhan was the one I passed the magic bead on to. Then I click, click, shuffle, slip, slide. Grammy take the laughing. Maeve say, look like your feet, fancy feet, moved down another generation. Grammy's eyes look to the left, look to the right, no approaching customers. Then, sitting in her chair, her feet under the table start to move. Clickety tap, click. That's all for that piece.
Thank you for that piece. And so my first question, especially easing into that, because I'm glad you read from her younger years, Theo, because I also noticed those parallels, and we had talked about it with your previous novel, Castle Across the Magna Carta. You also start that one with the narrators at a younger age and really aim to capture kind of the sporadic thinking and like, the observance of a young character. And you held it for a long time in this book. Whereas with Castle Across, like you age them kind of progressively pretty fast. And this one, we stay with Theo in a young age, and we really sit with her as she's seeing a lot more.
Well, Castle Cross, started in childhood, but it went literally from youth to old age. It went over 69 years, whereas this stays in 7 years. So she's 7 and then 13. And then the epilogue, she's a little older, but yes, it stays within those. So this one is very much all from the child's point of view, and also because it's all in first person. So early in the book, there are times when the reader may know more than Theo, but then she sort of grows into knowledge.
Yeah. And did you find that hard? Because also you're operating, like you said, with the understanding and or hope that the reader will kind of be able to put those things together, even though those of us reading now obviously weren't alive in 1857 and so forth. So we're also seeing her families teach her and educate her and how she absorbs information. So did you find that somewhat difficult to navigate in terms of, especially when you're doing those incremental growth in terms of how her voice would change?
Well, sometimes she speaks, sometimes there's a little difference when she's with the Irish family. When I wrote it, I was most intimidated about writing the Irish syntax. I mean, everything is distant from my experience because, it was 150 years, 160 years ago. But that in particular, because I was raised in African American culture, even the Black characters, I kept my etymology dictionary close at hand just to know what words were invented and what words not. And also early in the book, in the second chapter, her Black family takes in a woman who escaped slavery. And so I wanted to be careful not to go too cliches in terms of that language. So, so one thing with the Irish that I did that helped me get into it, because I realized, I'm not writing an Irish accent. I'm writing syntax that can remind the audience, can take them to this, so they can fill in the rest. But if I can get a certain syntax, then they can hear that language. And so there were a few little things that I learned. So Irish, by the way, some people don't realize that Irish is a language. It is under a Gaelic umbrella, but the language is not. People, sometimes people say, no, Gaelic's the language. No, Irish is the language, or you could say Irish Gaelic, but there are several languages under the Gaelic umbrella, and Irish is just one of them. So in Irish syntax, when it became the colonialist language, English, sometimes they applied the Irish syntax to that language. And in Irish syntax, after is an auxiliary verb. And that helped me a lot. So if you want to say, I went to the bookstore, you could say, I'm after going to the bookstore. Or if you want to say, I just went to the bookstore, I'm only after going to the bookstore. And that actually, just like those little things like that, helped me to be able to bring her Irish family and also Theo's syntax when she's with them. So, and starting, I think also with a child, I don't think I realized this until I finished the book, like why I really wanted to start with a small child. Because I wrote the book, because I wanted to explore the relationships of those two communities at that time. And because there was so much interaction, including a lot of biracial children that came out of these interactions. I thought that was the best way to do it, that she was of both communities. And I think the reason I started with her that I didn't realize until I finished was that I was starting a place before she was having prejudices, before she was having assumptions about either. She's just, this is her, her maternal grandmother, and this is her paternal grandmother. And they have different cultures and a lot of the same sort of 5 points cultures too, those overlaps. So, yeah.
I don't want to veer too far, but like what you said about syntax is so interesting to me. Because I've also done a lot of presentations on how, especially in children's lit that I've seen, where people kind of make these assumptions and kind of go a very specific way when they're writing enslaved characters, especially people who are not Black. And it's not to say, like, again, one there. So it's not to say no one can do this, but noticing this, especially in children's book where they are children and, the stories kind of unravel in a very different way because of the readership, like how there isn't that attention to syntax. There's this attention to feeling like they have to modify all these words to sound Southern, which all have regional dialects also. Yeah. So it's so interesting to me that you're just like, no, I want to talk about syntax And I'm like, yes, let's talk more about syntax. Like, let's put that in the craft talks. Like, let's like really talk. So how did you kind of get to that understanding and not veering into the stereotypes that even Harlem Renaissance writers did? You know, like Hughes and Schuyler. And Schuyler, I think in Black No More was doing it in a more mockumentary way. But still, he has it present in his work.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's some stuff, like I actually had read John McWhorter's book, the linguist, and it's called, I always say this wrong, Talking Back, Talking Black, or the other way around. I always forget which one's first, but it's very much about Black English. A slim book, like 100 pages or something. It's interesting reading that because he talked about, like, sometimes if you read like some Harlem Renaissance literature, even like Claude McKay, there is some stuff that now would be cringy, but at that time, it came from some truth. For example, Lottie, right? But it came from, it's a Black writer at a time when people are coming from the South and maybe saying that. So I don't want to go, you know, in the 21st century, I could not go to cringy, but I also was not going to make characters speak like in the 21st century, right? So I try to find a happy medium with that in a way that can keep, so it feels truthful and to keep the characters there. And I'll also say that because, you know, there are perfectly fine novels with little to no dialogue, but possibly because I come from, I'm a playwriting background, like I always have dialogue. I always go in terms, of syntax, of dialect. I mean, this book actually, because it's first person, is the entire, you know, it's the entire book is dialogue in a sense. So, so that's, I should say, that's how, probably coming from a playwright's background, that's how I build character, is through their speech.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's so important too, because especially like we were saying, when you're having a young voice start out and navigate so much of the book, and then, you know, age her up in time, and you see that development of voice, but also with like the relationships and what kind of Theo comes to see and has to reckon with as a biracial child of an Irish family and a Black family, and to see those oppositional yet similar ways that they're treated, in especially, no one's really wealthy, obviously, in her family. And, you know, a lot of people kind of live together, like with Kieran, his arrival. And that seems like a very important relationship that we go on to follow. And, you know, like people find out more in the later years about where they end up or where they don't end up. But it seemed also when you have Theo be an orphan, and there's a point where it's not that she's okay to be an orphan, but it like when you have that comparison of Kieran, who she sees actively mourn at the graveside for people, and she seems dealing with it in a very healthy way. like philosopher parent.
She calls herself Orphan Lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the book is 36 chapters. The first chapter, because this is also an important fact, Theo is also, she has cousins, but she is the youngest of both families. So it starts out the book starts out, it is her 7th birthday. And so she's going from one tenement to the other to get spoiled by, you know, both Grammys and her aunties. And in the second chapter, there are these two new people, Kieran, this boy, orphan boy, fresh from Ireland, and And Miriam, who is the person who is the young woman who escaped slavery and becomes a part of her Black family and is adopted into that family. So, so she goes from being the center of everybody's attention on both sides of the family. And that's how sort of then in the second chapter, the rest of the book is sort of kicked off in terms of her having to navigate suddenly not being the center of attention. So, and that comes up because Miriam's mother was sold. I mean, Kieran's cousin Hen, short for Henriette on the Black family, also was an orphan. There's a lot of orphans in the book. And on the Irish side, there's her great uncle Fergus, but there are cousins and second cousins, and everybody else except for Kieran, the little boy, are women. Also, actually, on her Black family side, although her auntie is married, but her auntie lives in Seneca Village, was another thing that I wrote about this Black neighborhood from that time, which was destroyed to make way for Central Park. But yeah, actually, Jen knows my first novel, Castle Cross. There were 4 protagonists in that, all of whom were men. This is one protagonist, but beyond her, it's very much more about women. Like I actually deliberately decided this one I wanted to focus on women after Castle Cross.
Just cleanse the palate. Like now we're doing the estrogen. We did testosterone in the last book. Estrogen. So it's 5 to 9 our time. So I want to ask you if you want to delve into the second part.
Sure. So this is from Theo's Black family. And this, let's see, where am I? So there are 2 characters in this, which are Theo and her auntie Miriam. So that is the woman who had escaped slavery from South Carolina, actually, from the Deep South. It's actually a year before the previous reading. She's 8.5 years old. So this is the summer of 1858. And so Miriam, she had been living with Theo's mother her grandmother in Five Points, but now she's newly married and living with her husband in the West 30s, which was also that there's a particular street there where there were a lot of Black families. I gots to go out little while. You help me? I love helping Auntie Miriam. She opened a big jar of the concoction, almond oil, shea butter, beeswax. When I spread the liniment over her left arm and hand and back of her neck, she stared in her little round looking glass set on the table, applying it to her cheeks and chin and forehead and eyelids. Auntie Miriam looked funny, light skin her face and neck and hands, and dark everywhere else. But face and neck and hands, the only part shows when she out and about, so them's the only places she need to potion. Here's what I reckon. Auntie Miriam remember Miss Sally, colored boarder who made herself light and pretty for the gentleman, and Auntie Miriam want to be with the fashion. Auntie Miriam Africa at home, mulatto in the street. Come back later that evening, Auntie Miriam take to a rocking chair, light her smoke waiting for Mr. Samuel. I never seen Auntie Miriam smoke before, but now she enjoy her pipe like she was born to it. I help wash the dishes, Auntie Miriam. I gets to 'em directly. She puff, eyes in the dark out the window. Wonder why she prolonging a chore. Then I know she don't want to stick her hands in no water yet. Now you really look like my auntie, Auntie Miriam. She turned to me. eyebrows a question. Or my mother, I giggle. Except my mother was Irish. She couldn't look like her. Auntie Miriam's eyes stuck on me. I chuckle, but my laugh's starting to lose air. Both us pretty. Light. Her puffin' stop. Eyes narrow. You know why I do this, Theo. I stare. Auntie Miriam never stirred to me like that before. I nod. Then why you natter on? I don't know what answer I'm supposed to give to that. She sighed, back to her rocking, eyes back to the window. Me and the crickets wait. I'm a homebody, likes my walls round me, but sometime gots to show my face in the world, the odd errand. Now Auntie Miriam looked to the looking glass, staring at her fair cheeks. No smile. She speaks soft, like more talking to the mirror than to me. No kidnapping me back, whipping chain. South Carolina ain't never finding their dark-skinned Lizzie. Not on the street, no how. Then we both quiet till my yawn sneak up and bellow. In my dream, I'm walking down Broadway with Auntie Miriam, and here come the slave catchers. Then I see Auntie Miriam forgot to put on her light-skinned disguise. Scared for her. You see, Lizzie, one of them say. I shake my head, no, but surely they see my heart pound through my chest. Then Auntie Miriam beside me take the laughing, hold her belly, rolling on the ground, the funniest joke. I start to smile, then feel my water. Wake up. Slip outside to the privy. Walk back when I'm done. On the stoops a pail of water for clean and dirty feet. Rub them till they glisten, then step inside. A murmur from the other bed closet. Mr. Samuel must have come home while I was emptying myself. Creep back to my room. Notice the other door ajar. Mr. Samuel washing the light skin off Auntie Miriam. Chimney sweeping, Mr. Samuel always carried the soot filth, but now washed. Him darker in me, but lighter in his wife. And on the bed, they sit together. Her face already clean brown. Now he work her arms. He do it soft. His skin moving slow against hers. Faces close to each other, eyes warm at each other, and where he washed off the light lotion and her brown flesh peeking through, he kisses. His lips against her clean, soft elbow, brown, soft lower arm, muscle and fat, slow and mellow, her shining deep, dark brown skin, delicate and strong. And the gentle and the tender and the smiling get to feeling so much like something private, like something ought to only be between man and wife, that I get the blush and scurry quiet back to my own room. Good night. That's that one.
Thank you for that. And it's great to get those parallels of the family dynamics as well, like in the readings. Because again, I was rereading Skylar's Black No More, and like the main character, Max/Matt, who is a Black man who turns white, literally, he, there's a point where he says, I never forget I'm Black, ever. And for Miriam's character, especially in those beginning sections, she can, like that, there's no detachment from slavery and like her always like watching her back and wondering what's going to happen and all those things. So including a character, like what pushed you to include a character like Miriam, like an adopted aunt and just family member who's also dealing with something so different from what they've experienced as Northerners?
Yeah, well, Theo's Black grandmother. So I should say that emancipation came to New York in 1827. So it's 30 years of freedom. But her grandmother and her great grandmother remember slavery. Her great grandmother was who's still living, was in her 50s, I think, or late 40s maybe. And her grandmother was in her 20s. Her aunt and her mother were never enslaved. But yeah, so I think partly because she does have this distance from it, that I wanted to bring Miriam, as an enslaved person, because this is also the time of the Fugitive Slave Act. So Miriam is in danger all the time. Frankly, all Black people are in danger, because if there was any, a free person could be kidnapped back to slavery if they were in the wrong place in the wrong time, and it's the white person's word against them, and they didn't have their free papers with them. So yeah, and also and there is a part a little later in the book when Theo, it's like the next, yes, it's in 1859. So it's around the time of the previous reading, when Theo actually does have a moment where the only time when she actually sees slavery firsthand, because she's working at a hotel as a little servant girl. And there's a woman from the South there who brought a little Black girl who's enslaved, her slave, with her. And it's a chance for Theo, actually, it was my chance for Theo to actually have to see that firsthand, because she, compared to many Black people in the country at that time, she was privileged that she never had to see it firsthand. And even if it was something of her, and her grandmother talks about her great grandmother doesn't speak a lot. She's just sort of sits in the corner a lot, although sometimes she talks. As a matter of fact, sometimes she speaks Dutch, because of Dutch people were in New York, and that's what her masters were. So she knows Dutch, but she hears stories a bit from her great grandmother and a lot from her grandmother. But I think it's like anything, any generation, it's like, oh, that's the old people's thing, And so it's not really something directly until she runs into this little girl. And also, it's sort of a whole other subject, but Miriam is a Muslim. Her mother was from Africa, and of course had been Islam in Africa, and her mother should not have been there, because this is long since the transatlantic slave trade had been declared illegal. But there was a lot of pirate ships going on up until the Civil War, and going through New York, actually, a lot of them. I mean, most of the people were sent to like Cuba, Brazil, but yeah.
And I just want to note a comment from Paula, from those watching. Anita writes that this is one of her favorite books of last year, great example of literary fiction.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So I also want to ask, because, I am such a fan of yours, what I really appreciate about your work is obviously within bringing forth a historical context and really immersing us in it. And, again, you do this for like a period of time because you really want readers to feel the world as the world. I don't even know if changes is the right word to convey that, because so much, like, especially when I read your work, I see so many parallels to the present day, like the Seneca Village going away and then the riots. And there were various riots, there wasn't like, okay, we're like the draft riots were like the big kind of climactic event in this book. But there were things happening before then. And then, like the sales of, of with Miriam and Theo consistently seeing like runaway slaves, or we're going to sell people, and like how are people going to react to the Civil War, and people being, the aristocracy, and how especially there's that period where as Aunt Eunice is talking, like writing to Ambrose and talking about this closing or like the demolishment of Seneca Village, and just like how, what is it, like they don't want to have less. Those who have are afraid to be the have less. And how that perpetuates so much today still. It's really like what this country was colonized on was certain people will always have wealth, and let's maintain that wealth. Let's maintain that power. And I don't know how it is for you as writer to kind of dig into this stuff, because there's a lot of brutality too. Like it's not all brutality, which is again what I appreciate about your work, is that you allow us to see these families be families, and they're not defined solely by it, but you don't hide it, because again, you're really showing us building a whole world for us to be part of. So how is that for you as a creator to kind of stick with that and be immersed in all this research and have those kind of directives for yourself in terms of how this book will go?
Yeah, I mean, this book, it was interesting because Castle Cross, I knew what the climax was going to be, but everything else, I basically like made it up as I went along, right? I just, wherever the characters took me. With this book, history very much defined, what was happening. So again, I knew what the climax was going to be, but the day to day, what was going on in New York at that time, what was going on in the country. And to some degree, I would also check out to see what's going on with Ireland at that time. Her Irish family, by the way, were famine refugees. So every year is a different section, and I would find out what had happened in the city and the country at that time that I felt will be applicable to the family. And then of these, couple hundred events, I would narrow it down to what I felt made the most sense. Then I would divide those into chapters, and I also, I have a lot of devices. Like I have a lot of newspaper articles, which were real newspaper articles from the time, because before 1926, they're in the public domain. So I didn't have to pay for them. So
keeping it real on the budgetary means.
It would have been a really expensive book otherwise. And there are also the newsboys calling out these things. And that helped me because what was going on in the world was so important to what was going on in the families. And to some degree, I mean, people read, there were over 100 newspapers in New York. There might have actually been over 200, but there were definitely over 100. So everybody can have their favorite newspaper. And people, for the most part, were literate. And so that's how they got their news. So people could discuss these issues. And some of that went on. But then I conveyed other information from, what was the newsboys? What are they saying? And what, because especially as time goes on, I tried to develop an engine. So it becomes, things are getting tighter and tighter in leading towards the climax in terms of tensions that are going on. And for people that, people haven't read the book and, presume the tensions between the two communities, that is going on. But I think an important thing to mention I actually had an event in New York at the Irish Art Center, and and I was talking about this, is that I feel like two communities, such as that time, the African American and the Irish community, many of them immigrants, could get along for years, in very tight quarters together. But then when something does blow up, which has a lot to do with the influence of outside politics that divides them, then when that blows up, then suddenly there's, they don't get along, when actually most of the time they did. And that was really important. The little piece I read from the Irish family, there was a lot of interaction in dance halls, after working all week, people like busted out in the dance halls, they had that. And what came from those dance halls of 5 points were the Irish community brought stepping from Ireland, the African American community brought stomping that originally came from Africa. This all became an amalgamation, which by the 20th century they called tap dance, right? So this all came from, from the connection of these two communities. I have no idea if that answered your question at all, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't remember.
I like that you give even more context, because I feel like that's really helpful for listeners too, from this writer's perspective.
The original thing.
Yeah. So Janet writes that she would love this book to be adapted as a play or movie. So.
Me too.
Yeah, adaptation rights. And Byron wants to know, will you stay with historical fiction for your novels, or do you think you'll also write some contemporary stories?
What's interesting is, so I wrote many, many, many plays before I wrote these two novels. Almost all of my plays are contemporary stories, but for some reason with both novels, the second one starts in 1941. So it's mostly in the 20th century. So I guess, I don't know if that's still called historical fiction or not. I'm not sure, but
some people call the 1980s historical, and I gasp and start getting heart palpitations, because I'm just I'm 40. What? Why are we saying historical? Jesus.
Oh, okay. But I don't know if it's because of having the bigger canvas or whatever that I've done that. I have definitely know what I would like a third novel to be, which I don't want to talk about now. And it's definitely historical. Not because I just planned it, but for some reason I keep coming back to history for the novels thus far.
That makes sense. Do what you love. Do what you love. But maybe they see Kia's plays for their contemporary. Hey, Paula, welcome back.
Hello. This has been so interesting. The time is flying by. I could listen to you talk all night long. Since you're talking, we tapped into a little bit of your background with theater, and Byron, it seems like it would be perfect. Couldn't you adapt your own book? Yeah.
Yes, I could. But here's the thing. I actually thought a lot about with my first novel, but it would have to be like Angels in America. I couldn't do it on one night.
Right.
So to tell you the truth, I would want a theater to say they're really interested before, because it will be a lot of time and effort I would put into that. If then a theater would say, oh, we can't do two different plays, So if I got the offer, I would totally do it. But I feel that way. It's funny because I never thought so much on the stage. I'd be happy with a miniseries, but if it were offered, I would surely do it. But again, strangely, I could see Moon and the Mars as a single entity easier than my first novel. I think probably because the first novel went again for 69 years, whereas this is much more contained.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And speaking of that, did you always know that you wanted to branch out into writing novels, or did it just kind of come organically?
Yeah, no, what happened was when I had the idea for my first novel and I realized this is not going to fit into a play. I just realized I did not know how big it was going to get, but I knew it was going to be bigger than like 2 hours of an evening. So that became a novel. And then having written the first novel, this idea was always a novel. Like I immediately thought that I wanted to be a novel.
Yeah, because it's very different muscles you're using there, I would imagine.
Yes. Sometimes I think more similarities than differences, though, because, the basic thing, and I realize this consciously, is that, so theater is, it's interactive. And I don't just mean if it's literally interactive. I'm not talking about the kind where people get on the stage or anything. All theater is the audience is there. The audience is going to affect the actor, is going to affect the performance. And as a writer, I provide just enough information for the actors to take it from there and also for the audience to take it from there. I mean, the 4-letter word of playwriting is exposition. So basically, you write a lot of subtlety because you can't have a character say, well, as I always said, it's got to be like, you cannot tell people no narrative, you've got to get that all in what a character would really say. Nobody really explains themselves. Well, when I started writing novels, I realized it's actually the same thing, that I give the reader just enough information for them to provide the rest. Otherwise, I'm overwriting. So,
yeah. No, that's great. I also want to ask both of you to comment on this, because I think you both would be perfect to kind of have a perfect kind of gauge of what's going on now. How do you feel is the state of Black literature as far as access and opportunity for Black writers in today's landscape of publishing? And have you noticed a change maybe post 2020, or have you noticed something over the last few years changing? We all know from a couple of years ago, the Latinx community had very serious issues about access and opportunity to the big publishers and the marketing dollars and things like that. And I'm wondering, do you feel that it's similar with the Black community of writers, or have things changed for the better?
I would love to hear Jen speak to that. I'll keep it short if I can. So I think the biggest thing is it's always the investment and kind of awareness and reactivity of what any industry has. So 2020, we saw reactivity. That's what I say. I say people reacted. They didn't act, they reacted. And so at reactions, I always say, and this is also me, like therapy, the years of therapy, it's not always the best way to go into a situation is to just I don't want to appear racist. And so let me do this thing. And so I think in terms of it's a hard question, because at the same time, everything shifts. And then there are more Black editors, especially at big houses. So the big five, for people who know, like Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, Macmillan, Hachette, and HarperCollins, where I work. And yeah, they were hiring more plebes, but that doesn't necessarily mean an investment, right? And because that investment is not just hiring more editors, like the editors bring in the books, but then do we have a sufficient staff all around to be able to promote and produce and distribute and have a sales team who understand the material? And if those roles also aren't populated in every sector, especially like booksellers and supporting booksellers and librarians and supporting librarians is from our end, then it doesn't matter how many books I acquire as an editor. I mean, I'll be working 24/7 to try and get that visibility, but if I don't have that investment in totality, then I'm being set up to fail, because the expectation is I should know how to do everything and that the staff in place is there to support me, but they may not have the same consciousness that I have. So I think like the biggest thing is like that education needs to be there, that investment, not just emotionally in terms of the reactivity, but psychologically and understanding like the harm that all of us can cause individuals happens, and to actually try to work on that before trying to create and like bring in authors and bring in staff and make more product, because the mandate is always more, more, more. That's the issue with any industry, especially publishing, is more books, more books. And then what does that mean? And so I always tell authors, I'm like, ask about money. I was like, ask about money, ask about what things are going to look like. Ask questions and ask about money. Don't be afraid to ask questions and ask about money, because that's how you're also going to learn more from a business standpoint. So the mandate is bring in more representation. But what does that actually look like in terms of what happens for authors? So that's why it's kind of a hard question for me, because the state is not like a consistent state, and it's not necessarily a state that is kind of quantifiable, because like we'll have Britt Bennett, who did really well during the pandemic, and a lot of other authors who didn't. And then so she becomes that's the model. That's what we all want. Like we want more Britt Bennett's, but it's like, but there's so many other amazing authors who, due to timing, due to chance, due to lack of support, just aren't getting what they need.
For sure. And I think some complaints I've heard in Black literature circles is that there's always this pressure of maybe they only want the stories that are traumatic or historical, which are great, but maybe, oh, yes, we want more representation, but we want it the way we want it, not necessarily the way you want it. And so that becomes a whole other piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And also our authors understanding that they might be writing that unconsciously. And so if I get a lot of submissions as an acquisition editor and I'm like, this feels like it's very white gazy, and people are like, no, but I'm telling my truth. And I'm like, I'm not negating that you're telling your truth. I am saying, who are you positioning in this? And if the first thing I'm reading on the first page is about assault or just like negativity or something that's, like versus Kia's book, where it's like, we're having a birthday party. Like we're having a celebratory moment on the first pages of Moon and the Mars. And it's just kind of unfortunate. And again, it's subjective too, right? For some people that may draw you in of just like, oh, that kind of like really emotional place. But I think for me, I'm just not in a place that I want to open a book with tragedy, like it doesn't mean tension isn't there, and it doesn't mean something great has to happen. But if the first thing is I need to analyze my Blackness, then I'm like, this isn't for me. And that's why, again, I really gravitate to your work, Kia, because you're not really explaining anything. You're really letting people live.
I 100% agree with you there, Jenna. I was immediately drawn into Kia's Moon and Mars, because it was just like, just kind of a normal family beginning, and really focused on Theo. And you just immediately were like walking through the streets with Theo, and it had nothing to do really. It had to do with culture and neighborhood and community, but not necessarily trauma or Black or white or whatever. And it just brought you right in. And not to say those issues and things aren't valid and don't need to be explored. They do. But I think, like you're saying, it's timing in the book. Are you feeling pressure to do it right away? Or it's the only thing that publishers are pushing for. So I definitely thank you. Two quick questions, or one question to both of you very quickly before we have to wrap up. Who are, whether it's for theater or writing fiction, who are some of your top influences, other authors, other writers? Kia, I'll start with you.
Well, in playwright, I don't know how many people know these writers, but there's a woman who's Adrienne Kennedy, who was a Black, well, I shouldn't say was, she is, she still lives, but she's older now. She was sort of a Black surrealist playwright. I mean, I could, there's like so much if I were talking about novels, you know, I mean, I can like start with like the obvious, like, you know, Toni Morrison or Baldwin, but gosh.
Yeah, novels is fine.
Huh?
Just your writing influences.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's interesting because sometimes that question is so hard for me because sometimes I think, well, I love this writing. How much it influenced me, I'm never sure, but I assume if I loved it, it influenced me in some ways. Mm-hmm. I should say, by the way, even though they pop into my head, it's not, I by no means just only read Black writers. I read lots of, during the pandemic, like I loved Shuggie Bain, you know. And yeah. And there's like this really quirky novel called Barn 8 about these radical vegans who are saving the chickens from the corporate farms that I loved. And this woman, Sarah Waters, that I read her book, she's Welsh, but it takes place in London after the First World War, called The Paying Guests, which was, those were kind of like my favorite pandemic reads. So yeah, I could keep going on. I can say these are books that I really loved, you know.
Jen, how about you?
I think I'm similar with Kia. I think I'm definitely influenced by stuff, but more it's like you like it. And I'm influenced a lot by poetry. So poetry is, because I feel like that no work really has limits, but I feel like poetry really has no limits. And then you can really kind of find out in what you can do in prose because of poetry. So Ilya Kaminsky's Deaf Republic. I'm a big fan of Cynthia Manick, who Blue Hallelujahs, and we're doing a book with her next year. I read Eduardo Corral's book, which was so great, and Denez Smith, who I love them. So I just like poets. I feel rejuvenated after reading poetry. I mean, I really enjoy prose and all that stuff, but there's just something about poetry. I'm just like, I can write now. I know words. Like, I can do this.
On words. Yes. Well, thank you both so much. I want to remind our audience that we have plenty of Kia's book, Moon and the Mars. What we don't have a lot of are signed first editions, and we do have some of those. So you might want to hit the ground running to get those, the last few of the signed first editions. And you can come into the San Francisco store, the Corte Madera store, or order online or by phone. But Book Passage has Kia's signed first editions of Moon and the Mars. Thank you so much, ladies. This was inspiring.
Thank you, Jen.
And also, just a reminder that thank you for kicking off the first of a 3-night series of the Race in America special events. Tomorrow night is Carol Anderson and Ian Haney Lopez. Yeah, we're going to be talking about voter suppression, among many other things. So join us back here again at 5:30 for Carol Anderson and Ian Haney Lopez. But for tonight, thank you so much to Keisha.
Look forward to Carol. Love Carol Anderson. She's the best.
We love you.